Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to another episode of the Disney Plus Project. So we were supposed to watch Phineas and Ferb Candace Against the Universe this week, but when we watch these movies most of the time is while we're at work, and Anna had lost her headphones, and so she wasn't actually able to watch it this time. And so I was like, that's fine, we'll do that next week. And so instead, this week we're going to talk about the Imagineering story, because that's one that we haven't talked about yet. But and we watched the whole series too. Mm-hmm. Or did we miss an episode? No, I think we watched all of them.
We watched all of them.
Because we were watching them as they came out. And I think we had missed the one. And then we watched it like a couple weeks later or something like that because we realized that we'd missed one. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, before we get into that, make sure if you're not subscribed to the channel, you hit that subscribe button down below. And make sure you leave us a like and a comment and let us know what we should watch next. So, the Imagineering story is, those of you who don't know, is basically a kind of an inside look into the creation of all the Disney parks. Mm-hmm. And it is a super fascinating look at it. So like if you're somebody who's like even remotely interested in the Disney parks, or if you're someone who's just even interested in like, you know, like Disney history or something like that, mm-hmm. It is amazing. It's
really good. Makes me cry.
Yeah, at times.
Because it spans from
the conception of Disneyland, which was, I think Walt had the original idea for it in the early 50s. It opened in 55. And it was either late 40s or early 50s that he started to have the idea for it.
So it basically travels all of Walt's story and then some.
Yes.
And the whole Walt story is what really gets me and makes me cry.
Yeah.
So it's really good, and it really because you're hearing accounts from people who actually worked with Walt.
Yeah. And
actually knew Walt. Mm-hmm. These aren't just like people who saw him in passing or like an underling from Nowheresville, Illinois, who was like, I once saw Walt walk by and he said hi to me. Like these are people who worked with him on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and had direct communication with him. Like these are people who really knew him.
Right.
And really had insight to what was going on in his head.
Yep. So this show, it covered all the way from the conception of Disney World, late 40s, early 50s. Disneyland, sorry. And it went through Disney World for its opening in 1971. And it went through all of that era, which was kind of a tumultuous time in the company because they went through so many CEOs after Walt died. Yeah. Because they really couldn't find anybody really good to fill the position. Mm-hmm. And then it got into 82 with Michael Eisner and the building of Epcot, as well as Tokyo Disneyland, which apparently, and I didn't know this, were built at the same time. I hadn't known it before I watched this. Yeah. Yeah, they were built at the same time. And like you just learned some really fascinating stories, like the fact, really, like the fact that they had not intended to build another Disney park at that time when they were building Epcot. No. They were like, we have our plates full. We don't really want to do anything, and so then. And Japan had kept calling them and calling them and calling them, and so finally Eisner was like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Or not Eisner, it was the person before Eisner. They're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell them, okay, we'll do this, but we're going to give them this absolutely ridiculous number. And we're going to, like,
Ellie.
God. And we're going to, like, essentially do everything we can to make this super difficult for them. And so it was like, okay, and so he goes and takes the call. And he talks with them for a while, and then he hangs up and comes back, and they're like, so? And he was like, well, I guess we have another project. And it was just like hearing stories like that was just so much fun.
Yeah.
And then like they had a story at one point about there was an earthquake that affected Tokyo Disneyland. And it ended up shutting down the park for quite a while. And there was a huge amount of damage, not to the park, but like to surrounding areas.
Just in general, there's a huge amount of damage.
Yeah. And the guy that was telling the story, that was talking about it, was somebody who he was there at the time, and he has been there since. And like seeing the passion and emotion from him, like to see how it affected somebody who was there for it and like was directly affected by it was just, that was another thing that was that like kind of makes you tear up, because you just like see somebody that emotional about it and emotionally attached to the Disney parks.
And I feel like a lot of, especially the older Imagineers, they're engineers, but they're Imagineers.
Yeah.
Like that's what really gets me with them too, is just how passionate they are and how much they care about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That really like hits home for me.
Yeah. And it's also really fascinating because for a lot of people, a lot of people that go to the parks all the time, they're like, oh, I don't want to know how the rides work, like how the Haunted Mansion, where like the ballroom scene and stuff. I don't want to know how it works because that would ruin the magic. And like, I understand that.
Yeah,
like,
for some people, that's a totally legit like sentiment.
Because once you know how it works, it's to you it might be like, oh, there's no magic in it anymore. I know how this works.
Now you know it's fake, as if you didn't before, but like now you really know.
Now because you know how it works, it makes it more real. But for us, we love knowing how that stuff works. We want to know how that stuff works, because that adds to the magic for us. Just knowing that, like, what all went into putting even just something like just the ballroom scene of Haunted Mansion. Because it talked about that for a little bit. It didn't go into full detail.
It really didn't explain it in like how this is exactly how it works, but it kind of references the technique that's being used.
Yeah.
And so if you really wanted to know, you could look it up just by knowing the name of the technique. But
yeah. And so, but like they, like we said, they didn't cover the whole thing, but they covered enough of it that Anna and I were like, this is awesome. And I think did we watch it before we went on the trip the third time? I can't remember. I think we did. Or it might have been right after.
It would have been right after.
Right after.
It would have been, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was coming out in October.
Yeah, one of the things that we had watched before was I showed you the video of how the track switch works in Everest.
Yeah.
Which is just more to why like the Imagineering story is so awesome. Is I love that kind of stuff. I love the science and the engineering behind the rides, and it does get into some of that, so you can kind of see like how they came up with things, and the fact that for the most part these are people who had to figure out how to do it. Walt would come to them and be like, all right, here's what I want.
That's exactly what would happen. He would just walk up and he's like, okay, I have this great idea. I need an attraction based on this, and I want it to do this, and that was all the instruction you give. And then they were like, okay, let me see what I can come up with. And they would have to go and they'd come up with, dozens of different ideas to try and go and show them to Walt. And Walt Disney, and I think it talks about it in this show, and we've seen some other documentary stuff about Walt, is that if he didn't like something, or he thought something wasn't good enough, he would tell you.
Yeah, he was
like
real honest.
He wasn't mean, but he would tell you, nope, it's not it. Nope, it's not gonna work. Or I don't like it. Or like, he did not pull any punches.
No.
And I mean, that's why Disney became such a huge company at the time, was because he didn't pull any punches.
Yeah. And it's also the fact that he pushed these people, his Imagineers, to do things that at the time were impossible. The Lincoln animatronic right now, seems kind of dopey and has a lot of weird glitches, and all the animatronics do because they're outdated now. But at the time that they were made, these were unheard of.
Yeah, they were absolutely cutting edge at the time.
And the thing is like, it wasn't that they had, like, people were already working on this. This is something that Walt was like, I want a talking Lincoln.
Yep.
And
it's like, I want Lincoln to stand up and do like part of a speech, and like I think he takes like a couple steps forward or something. Maybe he just stands up.
I can't remember.
We haven't actually gone on that.
We've
never done that attraction, but
the fact that Walt was just like, all right, here's this thing, I want you to do it. And it's not something that was already being thought of elsewhere. It wasn't that he saw an animatronic and was like, we could do that.
Yep.
It was, we're gonna do this.
Yeah.
And these people had to come up with it.
Exactly. And that's why it's called Imagineering. Instead of engineering, it's called Imagineering. That's why, is because if it was engineering, you would get Elitch's. Or Busch Gardens or something along of that nature.
Yeah.
Because that's what engineering is. You make something and you make it functional. Whereas in Imagineering, you make something and you make it functional, but you also make it tell a story. You use your imagination to make this thing tell a story.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what every ride does. You go through the Haunted Mansion and it tells a story. Everest tells a story.
Yeah.
All of them, even the newer roller coasters like Slinky Dog Dash tells a story.
Right. That's something that I kind of argue with my dad about when it comes to Disney versus going to any other theme park. He says, well, it's just a roller coaster with Mickey on it.
Yeah.
But it's not.
No.
Because you sit in those rides and you have a beginning and an end. You...
Also, let's get this out of the way too, is that if for being a Disney thing, Mickey is really not anywhere on anything.
You see Mickey as like the snacks. You see him like
and like the little hidden Mickeys and the meet and greets.
Yeah, but you don't see he's not the only that's not true. In Disneyland, he's on the Ferris wheel.
Is that Mickey's Fun Wheel? Yeah.
Yeah. So he exists on one ride, but really, and now Mickey's Railway.
Yes.
But
which is why so many people were excited about that ride, is because
there's really
Mickey doesn't have anything. He doesn't have his own ride in Disney World.
And so, but regardless of that, like every single ride that you get on at Disney, even if it's not blunt and obvious to you, has a beginning and an end. It has a story to tell.
The most obvious one right now, even though it's going to change, is Splash Mountain.
Yeah,
that whole boat ride, you're following this whole story of Brer Rabbit. I almost said Brer Fox, of Brer Rabbit.
I think Brer Fox and Brer Bear are also part of it,
but it's the story of Brer Rabbit going off on this adventure and trying to find the laughing place, and you're following through this story, and so it tells an entire story.
Yeah.
Whereas some of them are more subtle.
Yeah, like, and Everest is one that is very subtle, but you start out on this nice, like, you're going through, like, the jungles, and then all of a sudden you're going up the mountain, and then this Yeti's chasing you, and then you're running from the Yeti. And it tells you that story, even if it's not, like, blunt as Splash Mountain, where it's like, all right, now we're going this way.
Yeah.
It's a little more subtle, but it's a story regardless.
Right. And that's exactly why we have loved watching this show, was because, like, that's the type of thing that you get from this show. Is it shows you this is, like, one, how much work it takes to do all this.
Yes.
And it, at one point, at a few different times, it talks about, like, even the upkeep of them. This show also covered all the way up to Shanghai, because Shanghai had opened by that point. And even, no, Galaxy's Edge hadn't opened quite, or Galaxy's Edge was about to open. I don't remember if it did anything on Galaxy's Edge. It was a little while ago.
I think it, towards the very end, it does reference Galaxy's Edge. But because it hadn't opened, they didn't really go into much, at the time that they were recording it, they didn't go into very much of it because it hadn't opened yet.
Yeah.
But then, of course, it didn't release until after Galaxy's Edge had opened. But
yeah, and so it covered a lot.
It did.
And so, yeah, it was just super fascinating to learn, like, how all this went down, how the land was bought, like, what the companies that they worked with in Japan and in China with the Oriental Land Company, I think Oriental Land Company in Japan, I don't remember what it was in China. And, like, they talked about, like, going out on a chopper in Hong Kong to try and find a place for the Disney park.
Yeah.
And it was just, it's absolutely amazing. So,
I think that this series actually kind of intensified my love for Disney.
Yeah, I think it did for me too.
And I think it would for a lot of people, as long as they're not afraid of losing the magic.
Ruining the magic, yes.
If you're interested in any of that kind of stuff, you would love this. And
Absolutely.
I think it will actually make you grow to love it more, because there's a lot of bad stigma around Disney. And being able to see what really goes into it, and the work and the emotion that's put into this.
Yeah, and the amount of passion that people have,
It puts a different perspective on it, definitely.
Yes, it does. So, but yeah, that's kind of our thoughts on the Imagineering story. Like I said, it's actually one of our favorite shows, really.
I wish they would do more and, like, go more in depth on, like, particular rides. Like, do, like, a whole episode on Haunted Mansion and how things work and, like, different aspects of it. And I wish they would do that for a lot of those. Like, go into, like, how the tracks
how
were
things
built.
work.
I would kill for an episode just on Everest. Not gonna lie.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's it for this week. So hopefully we will be able to do Phineas and Ferb, Candace Against the Universe next week.
I have headphones again, so we're good.
So thank you all for joining us this week, and hope to see you again next week. But until then, don't forget to thank the Phoenicians.